instrucción es en 4, la descarga ahorita.
Professor Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Ágora seminar. We have the great pleasure and honor to host a talk by Alfonso Gambardella and Arnaldo Camuffo. Alfonso is a professor of management and head of the Department of Management and Technology at Bocconi University in Milan. He has a PhD in economics from Stanford University, a master in economics from New York University, and a degree in economics from the Università di Genova. Alfonso studies firm strategy, particularly technology strategy, and the impact of innovation on industry structures. He published on national and international journals. His best-known book is Market from Technology, published together with Ashish Arora and Andrea Fosfuri. Alfonso is department editor currently of business strategy at Management Science together with Joshua Gans. He is a fellow of the Strategic Management Society and research fellow of CHEPR in London. He was chair of the Business Policy and Strategy Division of the US Academy of Management between 2015 and 2016, and visiting professor of the Department of Economics of Stanford University in multiple occasions, and of the Sloan School of MIT. Arnaldo is full professor of business organization, vice director of ICRIUS in Vernizzi Center for Research in Innovation Organization Strategy and Entrepreneurship. He is visiting professor at the Industrial Performance Center at MIT, School of Management of the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and Universidad Deusto in San Sebastian. He's a fellow of Industrial Performance Center at MIT, of the International Motor Vehicle Program at MIT, at the Sloan Industry Studies, of the Groupe d'études et de recherche permanente sur l'industrie et les salariés de l'automobile in la Université d'Evry-Val d'Essonne. He has received several international awards: Distinguished Track Paper, Quality Management and Lean Operation Track, Decision Science Institute Annual Meeting at San Francisco, the Chris Voss Best Paper Award, Honorable Mention at the European Operation Management Association at INSEAD, the Best Paper Award for Knowledge and Learning section at the British Academy of Management Annual Conference. He's a member of the Academy of Management and the Strategic Management Society, and is a member of the editorial board of the European Management Review at the International Journal of Operation and Production Management, and of the International Journal of Innovation Management. Alfonso and Arnaldo, thank you so much for being here with us. It's a great honor for us to have you here. Please, without any further ado, I leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and thank you very much for this invitation. We are both pleased and honored, and it's a great opportunity to share our thoughts and to get feedback on a research program that Arnaldo and I are very much interested in, and so we would really like to hear your feedback. This is a particular paper, but it's part of a broader research agenda. So any feedback on the paper or on the broader research agenda, it's really most welcome at this point. The title of the talk and of the paper is A Scientific Approach to Innovation Management, Evidence from 4 Randomized Control Trials. And this is joint work with several people. You see a list of the most relevant people who helped on this project here as co-authors of this paper. So let me give you briefly the agenda, and of course, while I talk, questions are welcome, and of course, Arnaldo, if you have anything to add to the presentation, feel free to chime in. So this is really the agenda. So I will move from a background framework, examples, predictions of our theory, then show you the data and how we conducted the randomized control trials, show you the empirical results, and draw conclusions. So let me give you the background of what we have done. So in a nutshell, in 3 slides, I really want to give you the key takeaways of what we did and would like to present to you. Arnaldo and I have worked systematically on what we call a scientific approach to innovation management. The motivation for this is that we believe that there are great opportunities to improve the way managers and entrepreneurs make decisions under uncertainty. We think, and there's good evidence in the literature, that managers and entrepreneurs do not make very good decisions under uncertainty, and we would like to contribute to help the way to make these decisions better. Our basic argument is that if managers can make decisions under uncertainty very much like scientists make decisions about their research, which is fundamentally a decision under uncertainty, they can make better decisions. And in a nutshell, by a scientific approach, we really mean develop theory and do tests. What are key decisions under uncertainty? Well, innovation decisions or the launch of new firms are quintessential examples of these decisions under uncertainty. We are not inventing anything. We are really standing on the shoulders of giants. Many people in my field or in related fields have actually discussed these issues. And so what we are really doing is providing experimental evidence and building on the work of very relevant scholars. Here is a really, in one slide, in a nutshell, I would say, relatively massive effort we undertook in the past 4 years to run what we call randomized control trials on this problem. Essentially, we ran 4 big projects, 2016 in Milan, 2017 in Milan, 2018 in Turin, 2019 in London, with quite a few colleagues and researchers. All these projects are very similar. We take startups, we randomly assign 50% of the startups to a treatment group, randomly assign 50% to a control group. The scientific group is actually trained to make decisions in a scientific way, as we will discuss in a few slides. The control group is given a more standard training in entrepreneurship, and then we record the consequences. And particularly, we look at what are the implications of a scientific approach. The whole set of the randomized control trials involved 755 firms in total. We collected observations over time, and our sample is composed overall of 10,768 observations. As I said, it was really a massive effort made largely thanks to the work of quite a few people. Let me give you the framework. What are we trying to look for? What are we searching? What are we trying to achieve? If you think about decisions under uncertainty, and we can represent decisions under uncertainty in a very parsimonious way. And I always tell my students, we are filled with decisions under uncertainty. We make decisions under uncertainty every day. If we want to go to the movie theater and we want to watch a movie, we make a decision under uncertainty. We do not know how much we like the movie. We have signals, we have information, and we make a prediction. So typically, decision under uncertainty represented in the most parsimonious way is you have a goal, a value V, for example, you want to reach, and you ask yourself the following question. Should I commit now, which could be money, time, to obtain this uncertainty V in the future? So there are really 2 ingredients, a commitment you do now, and the value that you will earn in the future that now you do not know with precision and that you make a guess about. If you go to the movie theater, you have to commit now to spend 2 hours in the theater to pay the ticket for a value that you will be able to evaluate exactly only after you watch the movie. And quite a few times we walked out of the movie saying, oh, I should not have gone to this movie. This is a classical example of an outcome of a decision under uncertainty. Of course, quite a few times we also say, oh, it was a great idea to go to the movie. But definitely there are situations in which when you enter the movie theater, you were not sure what your outcome was going to be. So what do you do at the moment in which you want to enter the movie theater? You basically make a prediction. And what is this prediction? We call it V hat. What is V hat? It's a prediction of the value V that you are going to earn in the future. And typically, just to represent this decision in the most parsimonious way, you go ahead, you enter the movie theater. If your prediction V hat, it's greater than a threshold V star, which is the value of alternative opportunities. So if the alternative opportunities is to stay home, or to go and eat a pizza, or to do something else, what you do is a prediction of how much you will enjoy the movie theater and compare it to a prediction of how much you would enjoy an alternative allocation of your time, which would be to go to the pizza or something else. So this is telling you very much about this decision. Because essentially, given that you make this decision, you can actually commit two types of errors. Error number one, you decide to go to the movie theater, V hat is greater than V star, but actually you walk out of the movie theater and you say, oh, I should not have gone to the movie theater. I should have gone to eat the pizza. This is the classical type 1 error, false positive. You have decided to go, but you should not have gone. But you could also make that so-called type 2 error or false negative. You decide not to go to the movie theater, but in fact, if you had gone, you would have enjoyed it. It would have been a good idea. So what does a scientific approach do? A scientific approach enables you to make a better prediction V hat, a better choice of the alternative opportunities, and in the end, it's going to provide you with fewer type 1 and type 2 errors. So in a nutshell, what we are trying to test, we are testing whether by training entrepreneurs or managers to make decisions under uncertainty using the logic of scientists, which is theories and tests, will they make fewer type 1 and type 2 errors. So this is really, in a nutshell, what we taught entrepreneurs. I will give you more details, but essentially we train them to develop theories and test them. So very much like scientists. We often call the scientific managers the Galilean managers. So managers who have a tight theory and then actually go to the data and run tests. So what are theories? Theories are logical frameworks that tell you what are the important problems and make an attempt to predict the consequences of your actions. So we encourage entrepreneurs to think, to frame problems, and to say, okay, if I act in the following way, make a prediction of what the implications of your actions are going to be. What are tests? We encourage our entrepreneurs to go outside, get data, and particularly get data that try to corroborate or falsify the prediction you made ex ante, and therefore inform your action. And just to clarify, at the end of this cycle, you have three options. You can decide to terminate the current project. You can decide to commit to the current project, for example, scale it up if you are an entrepreneur, or to pivot to a different project. So what we teach our entrepreneurs is always to keep in mind this cycle. So you have a decision under uncertainty. Before you decide to commit resources for this decision, before entering the movie theater if you want, we want you to make a theory which is explain logically whether you will like the movie or not. Then go get data, maybe ask people, read the newspaper, check the internet for information about the movie, and test whether you will like it or not. Then take the action, or decide not to go to the movie, or pivot to a different action. I think that the best way to clarify what we have in mind, it's really to provide you with an example. And we have quite a few examples. I'm going to focus on one example that I think it's very representative of the framework we have in mind. So our example is the example of an electric scooter sharing business. This electric scooter sharing business is called Mimoto. It was launched in Milan in 2017. They actually came to our training and they literally followed step by step what we called the scientific approach. And as I said, it's a great exemplification of the framework I was telling you about. So first step, when they started, the goal was to predict VHAT, the value of this business. Now, the very first step was to make a decision on the key problems on which they wanted to focus. This is a very important step because typically many entrepreneurs are simply paralyzed. When they have to start, they think of all possible problems they have to solve. And one thing that they typically do not do is to rank these problems for the most important ones to the least important ones. And typically there is a very heavy rankings of these problems. And when I say important problems, I mean problems that can explain a large share of the variation of the value of the business. On many occasions, solving 2-3 problems will basically predict 90% of the value of the business. And many entrepreneurs are simply paralyzed because rather than picking the 3 most important problems, they do not have a good idea on how to select these problems and try to chase all the problems. Clearly, identifying the key problems, it's a matter of theory. You have to make a predictions on why these problems are more important than others. In the particular case of Mimoto, they decided that the 3 key problems were to find the target customer, to decide which kind of motorcycle to use, and to decide where to launch the service. For example, they minimized the importance of the problem, what means of payment we should use. Car sharing, bike sharing were widely available. They used apps. There was no point to spend time on thinking of what could have been the means of payment. This was not a problem for them because they could simply copy what was done in that case. In contrast, understanding who the customers could be was a much more important problem in this case because they are very much unlikely to be the same customers that use cars or bikes. Similarly, because no one actually launched a service like this, at least in Italy, understanding which kind of motorcycles was very important. Where to launch a service was also important. So the theory said that the ideal customer for this service was a young person with mobility needs and ability to pay. And then they concluded, who is this category of person? Well, definitely college students are consistent with these 3 characteristics, and they decided to focus the service on college students. Second, they said, well, regarding motorcycles, customers care about safety. So let's use large and solid motorcycles. Where to launch a service? Well, where is a service like this most valuable? It is most valuable because it's a service that enables you to be mobile quickly in traffic, vis-a-vis cars or public transportation and so on and so forth. But at the same time, compared to bicycles, you need to cover some distance. So the conclusion was this service should be launched in large cities. And so the conclusion of this first theoretical round was we should launch a service targeted to college students using large and solid motorcycles in relatively large cities. So what did they do? They tested their theory. They put out 600 motorcycles and showed them to college students and basically asked them to ride these motorcycles and get feedback. The outcome was that this hypothesis was rejected. Fewer students than a threshold that they had set beforehand concluded that this is a service that they wanted to use. So ex ante, they had a threshold, what we call V star. They said if more than 10%, say, of the students conclude that they will use the service, we will go ahead. If less than 10%, we will actually not go ahead with college students. And what they found is that actually college students were agreed to use the service in the future for a percentage that was lower than what they expected. They also figured out, this was very interesting, that women did not use the service because the large and solid motorcycles were not really, they were not comfortable with large and solid motorcycles. But interestingly, they had noted that throughout Milan, women were very natural users of scooters. So clearly they rejected the second hypothesis. They actually found that a higher percentage than threshold said that the service was good for traffic, and so they accepted to launch a service in large cities. Now, what is most interesting is that they went back to theory, very much like scientists. And here I'm really summarizing in one line a process that took deep thinking for about 6 months. What they figured out was this, and the logic was very tight. If you think about it, very much the logic of a scientist. They said, where is our theory wrong? It cannot be wrong about young people. Clearly, old people or incredibly young people are not going to use this service. It cannot be wrong for mobility. It must be people with mobility needs. And it can't be wrong about ability to pay. It must be a service that it's taken by people with ability to pay. But then the stroke of a genius was when they realized that college students had predictable mobility needs. These were predictable because their mobility needs were set by college schedules. This basically meant that they could plan their mobility in advance. They could say, I will take every morning the 8 o'clock bus. Or I know that if I get there at 10 to 8, I can find a spot to park my car. Therefore, they said, the service should not target young people with mobility needs and ability to pay. It should target young people with unpredictable mobility needs and ability to pay. And they concluded that the right target customers was then young professionals. Why? Because young professionals were young, with ability to pay, and unpredictable mobility needs, because they are people that are working in their offices downtown, and suddenly they have to go and reach some other place in exactly the opposite neighborhood of town, and so they need mobility quickly, unpredictable, and they were ideal users of the service. They also figured out that they could develop relatively safe scooters, and that this would increase significantly the share of women using the service. And therefore, by pivoting and standing on the hypothesis that they accepted earlier, which is large cities, they actually developed a service that was targeted to young professionals using scooters in large cities. And this really exemplifies how a scientific approach reaches the conclusions that they reached. Let me give you the non-scientific counterfactual, how entrepreneurs in the control group used to reason. First, they ask very generic questions. They go to customers and ask, what do you think about my service? Would you use it? Typically, they use what people, statisticians would call sample selection. They would select the sample on the dependent variable. They would ask family and friends, which clearly it's a very selected sample. This approach typically yields generic and non-informative answers, biased evaluations of the potential idea, like confirmatory biases or other types of biases, unclear decision rules, because once you ask people and they say, oh yeah, I would use it, you don't really have a clear threshold for what to do exactly. And most importantly, as you can see by comparison with the example I gave you, inability to see opportunities for pivoting. If you consider the point I was making earlier, the rejection of the college students' hypothesis was the main source of information for understanding that it was young professionals. So young professionals was not a random outcome off the top of their mind. It was the natural consequence of the observation that college students were not the right target. So let me give you the predictions of the scientific approach. What does the scientific approach do? Well, the scientific approach really does three things for you. First, scientific decision makers are more likely to terminate projects. Why? Because they're not subject to the same extent to confirmatory biases or to overconfidence. So they do take objective information, as objective as they can, of course, and they see when actually projects are not worth pursuing. Second, they find good solutions after they pivot. If they get negative signals, they see immediately where to go. They do not wander randomly across different business models till they find one by trial and error. And again, the example I made you was very clear. As soon as they figured out that college student was not a good idea, they had clearly ideas about where to go. And finally, they perform better as a consequence of the previous 2 points. They perform better because they do not keep pursuing negative projects, and they perform better because they either stand or pivot to better projects. Now, given that this is the prediction of our framework, what we did was to go to the data and perform our randomized control trials. The randomized control trials we performed, as I said, we ran 4 field experiments in Milan, 2 in Milan, 1 in Turin, and 1 in London. Milan, the 2 experiments in Milan were with basic startups, people who decided to become entrepreneurs. So don't think of these as high-tech startups. These are just people who decided to change their employment and create their own companies. We have high-tech students of the Polytechnic in Turin, and we have small, medium enterprises in London, micro businesses, to make it clear. And as I said, we are talking about 755 firms, for which we followed for about 1 year. So what did we do? Well, essentially all firms attended a training course with the same number of sessions and the same topics. 80% of the classes were the same for treatment and control. So this is not something that was radically different between treatment and control. 80% of the content was absolutely the same. The only difference is that in the treatment group, we insisted on the following 4 items. We pushed people to define theories of their business, develop predictions before checking the data, gather rigorous evidence, and make objective assessments as a result of the reevaluation of the 3 previous items. And this was not the subject of one particular lecture out of the 8 classes. It was spread throughout the 8 classes. So all the 8 classes were teaching content, and according to the content we were teaching, for the treatment group, we actually pushed these kind of issues more than for the control group. But for example, even the control group, we told them it is important to experiment, it is important to change your mind, and so on and so forth. It's only that for the treatment group, we really insisted on defining a theory, making predictions beforehand, do evidence, and do objective assessment. Just to follow up on my movie theater example at the beginning, for the treatment group, we basically said, okay, you want to go and watch this movie, develop a theory why you should like this movie. And then we asked them, make a prediction on whether you like this movie, go and get evidence and try to check your prediction about whether you like this movie, and then make an evaluation. For the control group, we would simply say, are you sure you like this movie? What do you think? Why don't you do some experiment? Remember, I mean, you can always go and eat a pizza. Okay, so we did push the control group to think carefully about what they were doing, but only for the treatment group, we gave them as a solution a protocol that was basically following the scientific approach. This is the timeline of the trials. So essentially what we did was, as I said, each and every trial, it's composed of 8 classes, which we delivered every other Saturday for about 3 months. And then we collected data at the beginning of every 15 days and then every month for about 1 year. So what you see in this slide, the thick rectangle is the training period. The thin line rectangle, it's the extent of the data collection. And so we got data collection systematically over time. And we did as much as we could, of course, to separate the 2 treatment and control groups so that there was no contamination between them. I also want to clarify all these experiments we applied to the IRB. We did all the ethical concerns and considerations. Of course, these are they were approved very rapidly because we are doing nothing more than providing training, but still, I think it's important to follow all the right protocols about these kind of experiments.
Alfonso, you have 10 minutes.
Excellent, thank you very much. So here is what we did with the data collection process. We collected data at the very outset, which is a baseline data set to understand who the people in the experiment are. And then we collected additional data through periodic phone interviews with several research assistants who were instructed to use a predefined protocol to collect and code several variables related to the variables we were interested in. Okay, let me give you the findings and how the findings square with our predictions. And I really think I can really give you here our results using histograms. I mean, we ran lots of regressions, but the regressions basically tell you exactly what these 3 graphs are going to tell you. So first, about termination. Remember, we have 755 firms. We found that 112 firms in the treatment actually terminated their projects. These are cases of firms that decided not to pursue the startup and to go back to their either former employments or other employments. In the control group, we only had 85 firms. And this difference, it's actually statistically significant. So basically, this is a difference that is sizable and statistically relevant. So this concludes that scientific decision makers are more likely to terminate projects. And the way we interpret this is the scientific decision makers realize that they are pursuing potentially false positives. The second finding, it's summarized by this graph. What this picture tells you, it gives you the share of firms in the treatment and control groups that pivoted. What is pivoting? Pivoting means, in our case, means they made radical changes in their businesses. So for example, in the Mimoto case, you start with a kind of business. You want to do a scooter service with large and solid motorcycles targeting college students in large cities. You actually pivot to something quite different, which is a service that is using a completely different means of transportation, scooters. It's targeting a different customer. And this is what we call a radical pivot. To be precise, for us, a radical pivot is change of the value proposition, change of the customer, or change of some critical elements of the business model. So these are not just adjustments of the idea. These are really redirections of what you have done. What we find is that basically slightly more people in the control group do not pivot. They stick to the original business. But the more interesting action is on the number of pivots. And there is a sizable difference between treatment and control in terms of 1 or 2 pivots. 152 firms in the treatment group pivoted once or twice at the most, versus 114 in the control group. If you go and look at how many companies pivoted more than twice, so many times, you find that twice as many companies in the control group actually pivoted quite a few times. So what this picture is telling you is that the control group, the counterfactual entrepreneurs, either do not pivot or pivot randomly. So either they are sticking to their original idea, or if they decide to pivot, they actually do not have clear ideas about where to pivot. In contrast, the firms in the treatment group, the scientific decision makers, if they pivot, so if they decided to go somewhere, they know exactly where to go. And they stop after 1 or 2 pivots. So again, the example of Bimoto epitomizes what I meant. These people obtain information from the failed tests and know exactly what is the problem. And just to make, again, to push the analogy with scientific decision making, one of the most significant inventions of the 20th century was clearly the transistor. And William Shockley was a leading scientist at Bell Labs who had developed a series of differential equations predicting the amplification of electrical current. But anytime he went to test his theory to find the right device, he could never corroborate his theory. Till one day, a test revealed a problem in his differential equations. He changed the parameters of the differential equations and went back and tested the right differential equations, and he found evidence of the amplification of electrical current. If you compare this to Bimoto, it's the same logic. You test college students, it doesn't work. You make an effort to understand why it doesn't work. You change slightly your theory, unpredictable mobility needs, and you figure out exactly where to go. But once you figure out exactly where to go, you pivot once or twice at most. And the evidence we have, it's very, very consistent with this kind of pattern. Finally, what we see, this is the average cumulative revenue. And just to give you what this picture is telling us in a nutshell, this picture is telling us that essentially our scientific decision makers reach roughly 50% higher average within a period of 9 months. Now, I have the regressions that actually show basically the same things. So I don't want to linger on the regression. I really prefer to go to the conclusions and then open the discussion for questions. So my conclusions is straightforward. We contribute to a theory of management of innovation. And basically, we find evidence that scientific decision makers are more likely and faster in terminating their project. This is actually something that I did not emphasize earlier. Not only are they more likely to terminate, but they are likely to terminate faster. I mean, if you are familiar with the language fail faster, that's exactly what we find. They fail faster. They are more likely to pivot once or twice and go exactly to where they think they find outcomes, and on average, they have higher performance. I will really conclude here by saying Arnaldo and I really think that this research program has potential, and we are really interested. There are many, many things that one can do with this research program. There are many things that I think we have not yet analyzed in detail, and this is what we want to do in the future, but it's definitely an area of research where the match between management research and practice is very high, and we have lots of potentials to understand things better. And just to give you an idea, and then I'll really leave it to the discussion, we still have to understand things like are educated people more likely to take advantage of this? what are the cognitive elements that helps decision-making in entrepreneurship, and several other issues. But I really want to leave it here so that if there is time for questions, I'll be very happy to discuss them.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. So we now have time for a few questions. Please raise your hand. I can see Jocelyn Olivari just raise her hand. So please, Jocelyn, go ahead.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you very much, Alfonso, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I teach entrepreneurship and all this design thinking and lean startup models to my students. And I was wondering, basically, I mean, all these methodologies of making decisions under uncertainty, which is basically what happens when you are developing a new business, right? A new technological startup, you actually need to learn how to deal with uncertainty. And so all these methodologies of design thinking and lean startup are designed with the aim of trying to deal with this thing, trying to test early such that you fail fast and cheap, right? So basically what I was thinking is what you are proving basically is that this theory, I cannot say that design thinking and the lean startup methodologies are theories, but are more like a kind of tools in order to deal with how to begin a startup. So I was wondering whether your paper basically proves that you should definitely apply this kind of methodologies in which they teach you how you should fall in love with the problem and not with the solution, because if you fall in love with the solution, then if you don't have a problem, nobody's gonna buy what you are developing, right? And this is basically what happens when you were discussing about all this, the false positives, because you thought that maybe somebody was gonna want what you develop, but you never tested it. You never gathered information, you never talked to your potential customers to get feedback on what they wanted. So I was wondering whether the courses, the training that you did were about these methodologies, this lean startup and this design thinking and all this tools to deal with uncertainty. But the difference with that is that you made an emphasis on the treatment group on how this should be more theoretical and be more rigorous on the application of gathering information, or the training was not necessarily these methodologies. So I was wondering, because there are these methodologies, so I don't know how this approach of scientific approach to entrepreneurship and management of businesses distinguishes from all these tools that are supposed to kind of lead the person towards a better outcome, fail quick and fail cheap and fail fast, and such that you don't waste your time. That's one of my questions. And the second question is, how do you said that scientific decision makers terminate more projects because you have the evidence that this is not working. I have enough evidence that probably this is not going to work. But how do you know how in your experiment, how do you know that this was not going to work? You don't see, because if the person stopped, you don't know what would have happened, right? You don't have the other, the counterfactual, right? So I was wondering whether, the solution would be give this kind of different entrepreneurs pursuing the same idea, right? And some of them in the control group, some of them in the treatment group, and then, the idea eventually that those that did not terminate it because they were from the control group, then finally failed. So, but I don't know how can you tell that if they terminated, they were actually doomed to fail? So if you could clarify.
Yeah. No.
Thank you, Josie. Alfonso, if you would like, Maybe we can collect, there are 2 more hands raised.
Yes.
So then we make sure that we can hear all the questions. So the next is Daniel Mantilla, and then we have Daniel Medina.
Thank you, Giorgio. I will be very quick. I was just wondering if you guys have looked at the reasons why this scientific approach makes this impact on the performance of these entrepreneurs. And I was actually thinking, in the first hand, why did the scientific approach got invented, right? So it's probably to correct some sort of behavioral biases that we have. So I was wondering if you have looked into the prospect theory, that basically looks at these psychological traits that make us make mistakes in our well, I come from finance, so more in like in the mistakes in investments and in risk taking. So yeah, I was wondering if you thought about the psychological biases that the scientific approach corrects for, and maybe relate to it. That was my question. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Then we move to Daniel again, but Daniel Medina.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, Dr. Alfonso, for your presentation. First, I will talk about the context. We are a company in technology, and we used to develop products and services for multinational customers, usually in USA. Our team is basically composed by electronic engineers, big data scientists, and sometimes physics. So we are very close to your approach. We use it in our projects because we are very skeptical. So we need data, and we need to test our products in field. So I was wondering if the conformation of the team and the culture of the team, which maybe is included in the startups that you included in your test, is significant in the conclusions, because for us it's very easy to understand your theory and to apply in the practice. But I was wondering, for example, for teams that are more oriented to marketing or more oriented to other like social issues, or maybe they are more practical. I have a lot of friends that are very practical in their approach to business. So is any relation with the conformation of the team in your studies? Thank you.
Okay, I think there are a couple of more questions, but let's maybe go to the answers first, and then we come back to the questions. So please, Alfonso and Arnaldo.
I will try. Arnaldo, do you want me to go ahead and then you, whatever. Let me give some quick feedback, and then if Arnaldo wants to add, of course, he's most welcome. So to Jocelyn, your 2 questions. Question number 1, I think they're very good questions. Question number 1, basically, as we said, we are standing on shoulders of giants. So we are using existing research and practical activities like design thinking or lean startup as a basis of our story. I think the difference between our story with lean startups and design thinking, it might be more of a difference of emphasis than a difference on really novelty. It's this emphasis on the theory. Because we have seen quite a few companies adopting lean startups, for example, and doing a lot of A/B tests. And just to make an extreme case, they tend to do lots of A/B tests without much theory behind. It's a lot of trial and error in doing these A/B tests. What we have pushed our companies to do is you have to have a theory beforehand, and your tests should not be just tests to understand whether A is better than B, but they should be tests about your theory, which then informs your action. So I think this is the emphasis that we are putting on things that is making a difference. And we actually found that this is actually matter. We also found that it is far more difficult to teach people to think theoretically than to actually run the tests. So this is really our contribution in this respect. On your issue about the counterfactual for the people who exited, you are absolutely right. You have to believe our randomization, because basically by randomizing, we are doing exactly what you have said. We are basically assuming that the people who are in the treatment group are just the counterfactual of the people who left. And what we observe is that conditional on continuing, you are doing better than the other companies. So you are right in that that's not the exact comparison, but the randomization allows you for making this statement. On Daniel 1, yes, super interesting. This is exactly what we would like to explore in the future. We would like to understand the mechanisms. There is definitely an issue about removing biases, but there is also an even deeper issue. What are the cognitive mechanisms that actually give rise to this? I'm sure that you know better than me, probably, Kahneman system 1 and system 2. And what Kahneman says, system 2 is you need to put more energy in order to make more logical decisions. And so there is this trade-off. But that's exactly what we would like to understand better. And of course, we would be happy to discuss. Daniel 2, excellent point. We do have evidence, even if limited, that indeed people with a technical and scientific background absorb the method better. It is also true, though, that our ambition is really to think that if we simplify the method enough, we can diffuse it beyond people with a technical scientific background. So the goal here is, if you want, your intuition is correct. People with that background perform better. But our ambition would be, let's see if we can simplify the tool in such a way that it can also be used effectively by people without this background. And again, this is a matter of additional research.
Thank you, Alfonso. We have two more questions by Vladimir and Guillermo Ruiz. Vladimir, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Alonso. Congratulations for your work, and thanks for sharing it with us. It's difficult to identify an exact number of pivots necessary to reach the initial hypothesis of the entrepreneurs. And sometimes similar happens with the time required for it. In your opinion, from your point of view, since your work, is there any ideal number of pivots or a time required to validate the hypothesis that allow you to design a winning value proposition? Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Guillermo and Juan Gonzalo also raised his hand. So let's collect this and then we go to the answers. Guillermo.
Okay. All experiments have the external validity problem, right? So, but let's assume that we are going to replicate your experiment here in Colombia. So what conditions should we change in order to replicate your experiment successfully in our country?
Thank you, Guillermo. One last question by Juan Gonzalo. Lots of questions from students of our master and PhD program in innovation management. So please, Gonzalo.
Yeah, thank you, Giorgio. After hearing what Mr. Alfonso said, I wonder, the key point here is the sample and also the questions that are going to be asked to our samples. And I wonder if you have a technique that you can share with us about how to choose the sample, how to, to make the questions in order to not get biased or to bias the respondents. And that's one thing. And the other thing that I would like to know is, I had the opportunity to read another paper from you, written by you about lean startup. And you make a comment, or not a comment, this is the conclusion that you make, that usually lean startup leads to incremental innovation. And I agree with you. And is there any other way to get to radical innovation through lean startup?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me try to address these excellent questions. On Vladimir's, the ideal number of pivots. Actually, I don't think there is an ideal number of pivots you can compute ex ante. But what I can tell you is that what you should aim at is not the ideal number of pivots, but it's to make the pivot most informative about what you have done. So the point, I would put the point in the following way. I would say that what is the ideal situation? You start an idea and then clearly you are going to pivot because basically this idea may be wrong and it may be a great idea to move somewhere else. But the big question is, when I move, do I actually hit the target more closely than someone else? That's, I think, the key. It's the derivative rather than the number of pivots. How fast do I conclude? Guillermo, replicate. I think this is a great point. We have tried to do our best by replicating this in 3 Italian cities, in London. We have more experiments going on. We are completely aware of the need to replicate. To be honest, I was surprised by how much we could replicate in the additional experiments. We'd be super happy to replicate in Colombia or somewhere else, or help you replicate this otherwise. It's interesting because one thing I've tried to push with journals is exactly what you have said. I prefer to replicate this experiment once more and to give more solid results about the external validity, as opposed to running a different experiment with a different question. There is more value in confirming somewhere else whether this works than in moving to a different paper. So in drugs, actually, we are not content with clinical 1. We want to go to clinical 3, which is a mere replication of what happened in the first place. So I really think we should go with replications. To Gonzalo, I don't know about radical innovations, but let me tell you this. If there is one limitation of the scientific approach, is that by creating a protocol, it kind of forces you to stay on a path. And it may, on the one hand, it may actually slow down potential negative effects, but it may also slow down potentially very positive effects. So somehow, if you want, the scientific approach, like the Lean Startup, anytime you put a protocol on something, you are creating better routines, but you are creating routines. And we know that breakthroughs happen when there are no routines. So if you want, this is one way of saying, I am trying to make the average entrepreneur much better. Probably this comes at the cost of the entrepreneurs at the very right age. So again, I think your question is a very important question and it's an open question.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we unfortunately run out of time. So what I'm going to do, I just pasted in the chat a link to a Google form. So if you had more questions, comments, suggestions for Alfonso and Arnaldo and didn't have time to express them now, please fill the form and I'll make sure that Alfonso and Arnaldo get your comment or suggestion, okay? We have to end here. Let me thank again Alfonso and Arnaldo for this great presentation, this great opportunity to discuss their study with us. And let me thank also all the participants that join us today for their interest and their very challenging and interesting questions. So thank you all. The next Ágora seminar will be in 2 weeks. We'll move the time to 9:30 instead of 8:30, and we'll have Haijin Yoon from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management. Okay, thank you everyone, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Alfonso.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.